spiritual inquiry for me, it wasn't something that worked with more dense material like this depression.
Mm-hmm.
It, it didn't work with like trauma and um, so I had to admit that at a certain point this approach wasn't working for me. And so my intuition told me that I needed to, find out how Jim worked, like all these, like the parental dynamics, the shadow pieces, the core wounding, these kinds of things that I didn't even really know what they were. I was aware that I had issues of depression, and that was, undeniable. But the therapist said, you have anger issues. And I was like, I'm not an angry person, but I was, completely wrong about that. Because the depression was covering this anger. And that's where the grief had come from because I missed out on so much life because I was trying to hold myself back from it because it was too much to feel.
Hi, everyone. Today, my guest is Jim Wilson, the author of a book, The Path No One Made, a book I read and really enjoyed and highly recommend, especially to those who, for those of you who read my book, resonated with it, enjoyed the read. I suspect that if you did, then you will also enjoy and you will resonate very much with Jim's book. Hi, Jim. There you go. Here's a beautiful, beautiful cover.
Something like that somewhere.
Yeah, I wish I had one to show,
Bye.
so I'm glad that you brought it. I'm here with Jim to hear basically about his story so he can share bits and pieces of it with you. And of course, if you want to read more, and there's a whole lot to read about his journey, then once again, I recommend his book, The Path No One Made. And Jim, I want to start with quite a long quote from your book. So bear with me, please. And here it goes. I have gone from years of depression, suffering, and resistance caused by living from my will to a place of true peace and freedom. My fight with life ended, and a love for it blossomed. I began this path as a suicidal and depressed young man, filled with rage and resistance to life. I have no idea how I managed to get through these arduous periods. I'm no longer depressed. While I still experience normal low points, they're much shorter than before. The oppressive, stagnant, and claustrophobic prison of depression I had found myself in since I was 8 years old is now gone. I no longer dread the difficult times of life. Instead, I see them as gifts and opportunities to connect with my essence. And I'm not done yet. It took me years to fully understand that it was not life that was the prison. It was my epic resistance to it that held me captive.
Yeah, reading that quote, I was kind of struck a little bit, like had some emotion come out because like this morning I've just been feeling this grieving process and just hearing that quote, I was just like struck because I think like I honor that person that went through all of those things and I'm just humbled by the journey, right? Like it's been incredible, really. Even going through all of the trials and hardship and all of that. So as you indicated in your quote, I grew up being depressed and that was I'm not sure where to go with it because that depression was like a the most incredible teacher for me on my journey. It always kept me honest, no matter what spiritual experience or um, place I thought I had attained or found myself in. It would always come back and just remind me of like, uh, here's this fierce teacher of depression.
Mm-hmm.
And so um that that depression and suffering is really what brought me to spirituality. I think a lot of people experience that. And yeah. So like as a child, like I never felt like um I always felt like an outsider. And I think that that sort of informed, like I was always wondering, isn't there more to life than what meets the eye? I just saw people who seemed to accept like this sort of consensus reality, and um I struggled to find like any sort of satisfaction in that. And I think that's what just started this search that there must be something more than that. I got into for a brief period into like charismatic Christianity. I wasn't raised religious, so I had no background in that. Um, and that was just this brief period. And there was this moment during a retreat where they were like, I really liked this kind of this is where like people like speak in tongues and they're like slaying in the spirit. They're like
Mm-hmm.
just doing all this wild stuff. Like they would get up in the middle of a sermon or something, and they would just and start speaking in tongues or whatever. And I was like, this is crazy, but I loved it. It was like visceral. I was like, this feels real to me. So anyway, during one of these retreats, there was this period of where we were kind of encouraged to ask for these gifts. So I went into this chapel where the seminary where the retreat was held, and I was saying, God, like, I'm just praying for these gifts. And in that moment, I felt like this some kind of energy come down into my heart and just open it. And it was this beautiful experience. And I was completely unprepared for it. I didn't know what to expect in that moment. But I think when we're um, just very honest and authentic, these things can happen. Um, and so that was really the first like really opening because at that time my heart was so closed. The depression, there was so much defensiveness around my heart
Mm-hmm.
and not allowing myself to feel these difficult feelings. And that experience of opening um, was the first real, like, it felt like touched by God, like visceral experience of that. And then, of course, we want to sustain that, right?
Of course.
I
You want to
mean,
hold on to
what
it like for dear
what
life.
is
That
the
feeling.
most beautiful
Yeah.
experience, right?
Yeah.
Like you want to
Yeah.
sustain that. And then life just took other turns and I got into other things, but um it was really like art and music that helped with my depression, and that was my form of spirituality, and that was as a young like adolescent, like just drawing these sort of scenes from my unconscious is what really helped me uh, make it through those times because I wouldn't be able to articulate what was happening. This was just a sort of, well, subconscious expression.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually that led to, I moved to Taos from Houston, um, and that changed everything. I was like, thought I had moved to build this airship and homestead and be out in this like vast emptiness that's here. Um, but then when I moved to Taos, I started doing some sweat lodges with Native American person, but it wasn't really my thing. And then my partner was like, "Hey, there's this person coming to town. He's enlightened, and uh, let's go check it out." And this was my first introduction to non-duality.
Yeah.
Um, and I didn't know what was happening in the meeting or anything like that. I didn't really understand what people were talking about. I didn't understand the language, but there was something um, behind those words. There was a certain energy, and even though I just didn't get there was something, this intuition that like I need to go back, and so I just kept going, and there was other teachers that came uh, and gave satsang. So that's how I got introduced to this non-duality, and um, had it like an awakening. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It, I kind of put it in quotes. It's like a definite shift in consciousness, but
Mm-hmm.
we're all sort of awake. There's always something awake in us and aware of our experience. I think it's realizing that this person that I thought I took myself to be was not my complete experience. There was something that was so much greater, um, that it's just that opening to seeing that it's interesting how really kind of small that shift in understanding can be, yet it can change everything in your life. It's a pretty amazing thing.
It is. Yeah. Yeah.
So even despite that kind of shift and as the energetic experience of the shift, of where you just feel all of a sudden this expansion. It was very similar to that moment that I described earlier of uh, prayer. Um, So yeah, I mean, like most people, you're like, hey, let's just chain together these amazing experiences, and that must be what enlightenment is about. I mean, that's what I thought.
Of course.
It's kind of sold that way, right? It's
Yeah,
not,
right? Even
it's
that.
not
I love that.
inaccurate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think that's just completely normal.
Yeah,
And so we
totally.
we strive to like, oh, go to the next retreat, this next teacher, this next satsang. I went to India, and despite like looking, uh, trying to do that, and what I was also trying to sustain this by doing these tricks of like staying in the witness perspective, or I'm just not going to think. I'll just stop thinking about whatever it is and just trying to stay in the awareness. And I think when we're just getting familiar with the teaching, um, we want to like discern what this uh, aware presence is, like how it's different, so we can begin to understand it and begin to find where it is, because it seems like something that's it's a little apart from ourselves in a way, and we want to move closer to it, let that um, this awareness that was in the background kind of come to the foreground. Um, and despite my best efforts, I failed with that approach. Like uh, spiritual inquiry for me, it wasn't something that worked with more. dense material like this depression.
Mm-hmm.
It it didn't work with like trauma and um, so I had to admit that at a certain point, it just this approach wasn't working for me. And so my intuition told me that I needed to, find out how gym worked, like all these, like the parental dynamics, the shadow pieces, the core wounding, these kinds of things that I didn't even really know what they were.
Yep.
I was just like, I want to know what these are because this teacher of depression just it wouldn't, it was just persistent and it wouldn't let me fool myself, no matter what kind of spiritual experience I was having. And so I was fortunate to know a couple of people that were doing this. They're going to the Barbara Brennan School of Energy Healing, and
I think I heard
shadow
of
work
her.
is a
Mm-hmm.
yeah, shadow work is a huge part of it. And um, they had told me like all these things that they were doing, these exercises they were doing to reveal this shadow and to work through uh, all these false beliefs and wounding and all this stuff that's in the shadow that's just a mystery. And I was fascinated by it, but I was also really intimidated by the work to get there. But something in me knew this is what I needed. And so I was fortunate because a school was opening in New Mexico that was started by a former Barbara Brennan student and
Mm-hmm.
teacher. And it was a Snow Lion School for Integrative Energy Healing. And the whole premise is that by doing this shadow work, when what your stuff is versus when you're working with a client. So you have that discernment to where you understand what your projections are, what their projections are. And when you go and you begin working with these shadow material, you sort of develop a map. You get familiar with it and familiar with these dark spaces, and because you're investigating it, it's becoming more familiar to you. You um, just begin to understand how it works, and um, so then it's really sort of shamanic in a way because you can uh, guide someone else through their work. So um, I wasn't particularly interested in becoming an energy healer. I just wanted to do these exercises because I wanted to get back to this beautiful feeling of connection with God. And I wanted to just sort of, at that time, like, I was like, get rid of everything that's in my way, like
Right.
all this material, like it's like this reoccurring, unresolved material. So that was my motivation. I just completely gave myself to that, like 100%, showing up for every exercise. And like part of this school is like it had a big therapy requirement and had to be not talk-based therapy, but actually like a somatic
Mm-hmm.
therapy, body-centered therapy. And that is where like my first meeting with the therapist, I was aware that I had issues of depression, and that was, undeniable. But the therapist said, "You have anger issues." And I was like, "I'm not an angry person," but I was, completely wrong about that. Because the depression was covering this anger. And so I got in touch with my anger, and this sort of somatic therapy was based on core energetics and the path work that was is a big part of Barbara Brennan's
Hmm.
teaching.
Can you say a
It
little
was a
bit
big part
more
of her.
about that for anyone who doesn't
Well,
know
it
what
was
that is?
well, Barbara Brennan was like a really interesting person. She was a physicist and got into the path work, which was this woman that Eva Paracas that channeled this material basically, and her husband was John Paracas, who started Core Energetics. That um, there's this trauma and armoring and defensiveness can be are stored in the body, and by certain physical movements combined with like vocalization uh, can remove some of the muscular armoring around these issues. And so it enables them to just come out and be recognized.
Hmm.
So, because it was a big part of her path, she incorporated it into her school. And so I spent years like beating on pillows and screaming and just stomping my feet and all kinds of stuff like that and just totally exhausted. Like I just gave my entire self to it. Um, because I was like, I just gotta go for it, man. This is my chance. This is my opportunity in life. This moment, to just get move beyond these things I felt imprisoned by, really, like this prison of depression that I had lived within. And so, like getting in touch with that anger, I was able to see it as a just a vital life force because this is um, letting the anger increase that instead of trying to decrease the anger, it's really increasing the anger so you can become aware of like what's behind it, like let it go through its full cycle of like identifying the emotion that's here and then allowing that to uh, come up and out, and then you get behind, uh, get to what's behind that, and it's almost always a innocent place,
Yeah.
and it's something that needs our love. Yeah, and then that can be integrated once we're aware of it and see what's behind it and love it. That's one of the most important things I think, like in doing shadow work, that maybe I don't hear talked about as much as really loving what we find there, because that's how we integrate it. I feel, because sometimes I did this like approach shadow work like I want to get rid of this stuff, and it was only until later I was and let me I guess when we want to get rid of it, we're really rejecting it, even though we're like if we're saying I'll be with this difficult emotion um, for a time just so I can get rid of it, if that's
Yeah.
the motivation behind it, behind even just sitting with it. But still this rejection of it. And I don't think it's until we can really um I don't know if acceptance is the right word, but it's just loving what we find there.
There's one thing that you said that as I began to release anger, a process that continues to this day, I uncovered the profound grief that lay beneath it.
Mm.
It held
Yeah.
all the disappointments I experienced in life because I believed myself to be deficient. So, can you talk a little bit about that?
I was, well, I was afraid of the anger because my mask was like serenity. Anytime a challenging situation would arise, I just go out of my body. And so this, like what everybody would, the other people would see as this mask of serenity, that was my defense, so that kept me not, I'm not of this world, Um, that anger, I was essentially afraid of it because if I had an outburst of anger, that would shatter this mask like of serenity, and this lashing out would sometimes hurt other people or it would hurt myself. Um, I had episodes of self-harm in my life, and this was just like trying to feel something. And the grief came from all of the life because I was this anger is like a life energy, really. It's not something to be avoided. Like when we work with it, we come we come to see it as this vital force. And I had become afraid of this, and that's where the grief had come from because I missed out on so much life because I was trying to hold myself back from it because it was too much to feel. Um, my system just couldn't feel that rage that would come out. My father, he had these periods like he would just go out, into this rage at times, and that just really scared me as being a little boy. And so I was just like, I don't want to feel, I don't want to be angry. I don't want to be that person, but that anger is generational, so I felt like it was sort of up to me to process it. Um, yeah, and behind that anger was the intense grief. That was the part that was the undefended part. This little boy that was afraid of life, afraid of really committing, because that's where my resistance had come from. Uh, like life is just too much. I think I was just a very sensitive child,
Hmm.
and to see like those kinds of emotions, like from my father, just like blowing up, or my mother, sometimes they would get into a fight and there would be like this intense emotion that I was just like overwhelmed by. And yeah, just to feel that was too much as a little boy. So that's where the grief was, to touch this place that was so innocent and afraid. Yeah. And so this like is unconscious, like this unconscious price we pay with uh, yeah, like I avoided conflict and had suicidal ideation. It was, yeah, difficult to meet life because it felt overwhelming to me.
There's a particular story of a teacher,
Oh,
which I
that,
found
okay.
really interesting. You remember this story? And
Yeah.
because it totally ties to the subject of anger, and can you actually tell the story?
Sure. So in one of the songs I attended, this man came up to the teacher and he asked this question. Like he admitted that he could not control his anger and he had physically abused women that he was in a relationship with. And I've never heard anything that honest in a satsang. And this was like my first like 3 months or something of being on this like journey. And I was like, wow, that, that's pretty intense. And I was just waiting for, let's see how the teacher responds.
Hmm.
And so he considered it and he thought about it, and he finally said, I don't have anything to offer. And I thought that was also remarkably honest because sometimes people will just bullshit some answer.
Yeah,
And so he had, nothing to offer this man that was like in pain and had come and been incredibly honest in front of a whole group of people he didn't know. I mean, that's like it seems like that's like the end of somebody's rope, like help.
yeah,
And because like when we don't investigate the shadow material, we we don't do it just for ourselves. We do it for others because then we can offer uh, our own lived experience. We have compassion for people. Like as shocking as that would be to hear about this man admitting to abuse, physical abuse, we can have compassion for people uh, when we work through our own material because we know that place within us. And um, yeah, we can offer, yeah, like a lived experience to others instead of just this sort of spiritual platitudes of what somebody else might have said.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Because in spiritual circles, like you were saying earlier, anger is a difficult emotion. Maybe it's the most difficult emotion. I think, grief and sadness and other things are uh, easier to deal with, but I don't see a lot of discussion around anger
yeah,
because we can be pissed off at life. We can be pissed off at God. Why do I have to go through these trials? Why doesn't my life look the way I want it to look? And then as you, well, as you do shadow work, you begin to understand like these things are just gifts. This is the most important teaching that we can receive, whatever that is, if it's anger or sadness, grief, because
yeah.
anger can mask uh, other emotions that are more defenseless or
Helplessness.
vulnerable, I should say, helpless. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it will be different for everybody, obviously. In my case, the anger, if it does come up, it's usually around, yeah, it's always been around helplessness, just feeling helpless, or being,
right.
um, you know, or sort of wanting to maybe set a boundary or speak up, and being afraid of that out of fear of conflict, right? So then there's this helplessness. So nothing comes through. So it gets suppressed, and so again,
Yeah,
it
we
boils
have to
down.
stop.
Yeah, and so
Become the peacemaker.
yeah,
Yeah,
it goes back to what you were saying is the fear of actual anger. So either fear of anger or judgment of anger as something wrong or something bad. And I think, you know, The reason why I mentioned the spiritual circles because I'm seeing and meeting a lot of people who come from all kinds of well, sort of traditional spiritual paths, let's put it this way. And just to make it clear, I'm not here to make traditional spiritual paths wrong. I'm just saying that all of them talk about this ideal, the ideal of a spiritual person, the ideal or the or what I refer to as the identity of a
That
spiritual
is an
person,
illusion that
right?
it stands
Or
in our way.
yeah, or the identity of an awakened
Right.
person. And so, for example, as an example, now non-reactivity becomes this ideal, the goal, right? And so I have no problem with non-reactivity, but when it's at the cost of suppressing natural responses and expression, then that really becomes just, suffocating experience. And then the suppression, what it does, it's basically it boils our blood. So no matter what face we want to put on of kindness and light and peacefulness, like people will feel the seething, underneath it. And
Sure.
so I think we all had like, the
It
passive
keeps us
aggressive,
honest.
whatever, right? Like it's just, yeah, you can't, it's something that we all feel, right? When it's that. So
What
that,
if
right?
we considered anger incredibly spiritual? What if we had that context and put it in that context? I'm feeling anger. That's what my experience is, and just always pay attention to what presents itself. That's honest. That's authentic.
Yeah.
That's how we don't delude ourselves and create a spiritual bypass or seek a spiritual bypass. Um, yeah, the non-reactivity thing, I wanted to go back to that a little bit just because I've, that's not my personal experience. I accept everybody's experience and their own path, and uh, there's infinite ways, to liberation, I feel like. But when we see these, uh, as gifts, that this is the real teaching, what's coming up for us in our lives, because life is the ultimate teacher. Um, it ceases. I feel like if we're saying I'm not reacting to things, that's a subtle form of rejecting them. Um, and in my experience, it's been more of accepting these as gifts, and it's not even accepting, it's like looking forward to them as opportunities, like in every emotion. Like before this, I was crying, like before this meeting, it was just there was a lot of tears coming out of grief around my father, and I'm like, let it out, it's so beautiful. I would have such gratitude for it. um so when we see that these are teachers, that this is the ticket to liberation, is to meet these things, to embrace them. And when we feel uh, sort of the most forsaken or most separate from God, that's I feel like that's when God is working in our lives. All of these, all of our difficulties, our personal issues, this is this is the gift. This is the ticket to liberation. This is the teacher. And when you see that, you begin to look forward to it. It's okay to react. It's if that's your experience, be with your experience, no matter what it is, or if your experience is like I'm a self right now. I'm a person that's suffering. That's okay. Be with that experience. That doesn't touch what you really are, and that doesn't mean that you're off the path. I think that because when those things come up, the real difficulties of dark nights of the soul, existential crisis, that's how we know that we're on the path because we're ready to meet those things. We're ready to more fully meet them because before we were defended, and I think awakening it opens up all of that material, like our aperture to what is the truth, what is awakening, what is this whole phenomenon. It just opens more and more instead of becoming a narrow thing of like it's just bliss or some range of like what we think it is, our spiritual fantasy. It becomes everything, absolutely everything, and you see that there's no separation in any of it, no matter what you are experiencing in the moment, that you're not separate. That is the same substance as our highest spiritual longing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, it's like this full spiritual return back to our humanness.
Yeah.
That's what I love about your book. That's why I was so and like excited, like to have somebody talk about like, yeah, all these human things, this embodiment, not just like some no self that means, the mind can take no self as like I don't exist, like or this is an illusion. The mind kind of takes the idea of no that experience of no self and kind of create something that feels disembodied.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the embodiment is where it's at.
Yes.
Totally. This is
Yes.
our teacher.
Yeah. And it's kind of, I find it quite sad, to be honest, that so much of the different kinds of spiritual teachings, especially when really kind of co-opted by the mind and misunderstood and sort of only looked at conceptually, they really actually perpetuates funnily enough, including non-duality, the sense of separation, and this constant kind of experience of being at odds with life and at odds with our humanness, because we perceive the two as separate. And I always find it fascinating that actually after the first awakening, that sense of separation can get even stronger, because there's this experience of formless, but now I'm back to this form and now I have to deal with it, but I don't want to. So it's like, they're
And it
trying
becomes
to,
more painful
it becomes
because they
even
have
more painful,
this
right?
amazing experience.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So there could
So
be like more suffering
yeah, exactly.
after
There's even
more
more, exactly.
suffering.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's going to get
exactly.
harder after awakening, no doubt.
Yeah. Which is such a shock to the system. It certainly was a shock to me, especially, if the sort of sense of that so-called honeymoon period lasts for a really long time, because it will be different for different people. It will be few weeks, it will be few months, but like in my case it was nearly 3 years, you know what I mean? So I just assumed it's just gonna be like that, for the rest of,
Awesome.
yeah. But, sort of like nice comfy equanimity, some highs and lows here
Yeah.
and there, but generally fine, and then
What a
boom.
shock after 3 years. That's a long
Massive,
time.
massive.
Yeah.
And I had no frame of reference. So like I wasn't
Mhm.
listening to anybody like the teachers or anything like that. I wasn't into spirituality. I wasn't into anything. So that confusion was even greater because I had absolutely no clue what was going on or how it was even possible that I was suffering so much, given all the insights that I had, and so on. So, but
Yes.
anyway, so Jim, you mentioned a point, and I don't want to mess it up in terms of timelines, but it stood out for me. So I'm not sure if it was 2013, but I do remember that you've done all the work. Like you did the school, you did the shadow
Right.
work, you did all the things. Um, so please correct me if I'm wrong, because you said I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that to take one more step into darkness would have been to go to a place of madness, and that there was one choice: go insane or take my life. And you
Yeah,
describe it as like this, well, I don't
a
exactly.
spiritual emergency. I've had a lot of like personal crises and like existential crises, like dark nights of the soul. But this was something that felt so much more intense. That just like everything in my life collapsed at once, and there was something uh, that just pushed it into this place of complete, yeah, into this primordial well, this endless well of primordial suffering. I can't say, well, I would say that what I only went through it because I needed to go through it. And this period, like that's how I experienced it, was like I'm either gonna go insane or I'm gonna take my life. That seemed to be the only uh option. Yeah, so the spiritual emergency completely tore me apart. And yes, it was surprising after doing all this personal work and all this uh, spiritual work, and that those times can like take us by surprise. It's like what's happening? Am I off the path?
Mhm.
Because we feel completely alone. We feel completely abandoned uh, by God, and these are places that like none of our spiritual or no technique works, no method or uh, process, and we're really in the unknown because we sometimes those techniques can keep us from a deeper experience of something because we've been like, I can use this technique or I'll use this technique to approach it. But when we're left in a place where nothing works anymore, we're in the real unknown. And these are the times when we find ourselves on on our knees begging for relief by what from what praying to whatever higher power we know. And I think those are the moments of real spiritual authenticity when we don't know what to do. There doesn't seem to be a path forward through it. And so we're just completely surrendered by the experience. I mean, that it just happens. It's not something that we choose to do. Like, I'm going to surrender into this experience because in this particular spiritual emergency, I was like, that well of this endless primal blackness, I was like, my intuition was like, do not surrender into this. You might not come back from it. So that didn't feel safe. I mean, that was the one place I came to that I didn't surrender into in this entire journey. But I surrendered into the experience of it. I mean, I can't, it wasn't my choice to surrender. I was surrendered. And that's, I think, an amazing experience. And I feel like these times are spiritual awakenings. We're awakening to something else. We're awakening to this embodiment. I feel like we view spiritual awakening as this, blissful experience of expansion and connection, and those times are wonderful and really necessary to keep us going on the path. But these darkest places within us are also like coming to those moments where the only thing that feels authentic is just to give up, essentially. Those are also spiritual awakenings. They're awakening to this other appearance of God. God's assistance in our life does not always feel good. God can be beautiful and soothing, or harsh and rough. And we get to experience all of these aspects. And had I not, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for every experience, but I'm really grateful for this experience, because this particular experience, because in that moment, I hit like the rock bottom of Jim. There was no further to go. And that place, and just like all of this shadow material, our darkest places become aware to us. They're no longer a mystery. Um, that place of this rock bottom forms, like, it tempers us. It adds this ballast, like, you know, like to the keel of a ship or something. So we have this inner stability, and that all of that darkness is, I'm aware of it. Like, I can draw on it. There's a connection between that darkness and the highest uh, spiritual truth I know. So if we don't do that work, we're missing out. We're we can be moved easily by things. And when we look out into the world, we don't understand why people act the way they do, why there are certain events that happen in the world, why it appears when we look out, we see all the suffering. But when we do the deep shadow work, we understand why those things happen. We see uh, why people act the way they do, and why world events happen. It helps explain a lot of things that happen in life.
Yeah. I mean, I
Yeah,
can't imagine awakening journey without this bit. I simply don't. I don't. I
yeah.
just don't. I just can't imagine.
It's an amazing gift. I mean, we're if we're not if we don't bring our attention to these places, we're missing out on a huge opportunity. I mean, to for liberation, because everything awakening is like everything gets to awaken too. We all of these places we become aware of, they want to awaken also. They seek resolution. Yeah. And then there's nothing to avoid. There's nothing to hide from. There's
Yeah.
nothing to fear.
When you go into dark places, when you see the pain that's at the core of separation, and you see it in yourself, to such depth, to such an extent, you cannot help but see it in everyone else. You just cannot, right? So it doesn't mean that there is a condoning of things, or putting up or tolerating, bits about, certain people's behaviors, or bits about life. But it's like, you don't have to condone, and you can still have a compassion, but it's not a performed compassion. It's not forced compassion. It's something that just emerges as a byproduct of seeing all of this in yourself.
This loving compassion for ourselves, this is how we find true compassion for these places. And then when we have compassion for ourselves, we can extend it out to other people.
Yeah.
When we begin to love these places, love our fallibility, our apparent, imperfection, and accept this beautiful facet of ourselves.
Yeah,
When we're free, we give everybody else the freedom to be how they are. Everybody
exactly.
else is free too.
Yeah. Jim, so I don't know where to go from here because one thing that stood out for me is just how much of crisis there's been in your life, all kinds of crises that they seem to be sort of like, but those points of crisis are also kind of like pivotal points because when I read about the Dark Knight, the 2013, and then you mention COVID, and then you mention, something else after COVID. So is there anything that you want to share about your journey that I know we don't have tons of time, but what are some of the pivotal moments after that spiritual emergency point in your life that you'd
I
like to
think
talk about?
maybe one thing is just, these crises are like an inside job. They're triggered by like certain events that happen, but I don't, I guess I just kind of have this emotional intensity. It's part of my particular like conditioning upbringing. And so I've been a very intense person in my life. And so I think those things just become big. Uh, One thing that happened, like after a couple of particular crises in my life, I went to Nepal because I've tried to work through these things like using like whatever techniques I was trying to like find all the help I could get, like professional help and things like that. And this intuition, like I think following our intuition, following our heart is key in the journey. It was just like I need to go walk for extended period of time, like 2 months and at a time. And that just that the act of walking for that length, um, I feel like healed these crises. And when I came back home, like the spiritual fire in me, I just found that it had died. So I had this long period of time that I couldn't really read spiritual books because they just sounded like gibberish. Um, and I ended up focusing on developmental tasks. It's not that I had only focused in this moment of
Hmm.
time, but so much of my journey is like being here in this on this earth, and because I had my defense was always to to leave my body. So being in this embodiment, being committed to a life, and so I focused on developmental tasks. Um, and then when COVID came, like I just had this, like I can only describe it as a reawakening. And all of a sudden, meditation just became easy for me. And the teaching opened in a way that it hadn't before, even though I'd understood things and I'd have understanding that was embodied. This like was opening to a new level. Um, yeah, and that has been like a really profound uh, gift.
Did that happen before the hurricane or after?
Yeah,
Because
before.
that
Yeah.
was before. Hmm.
Yeah. I mentioned it. I mentioned that in my book because there was these series of things that happened really close together.
Yeah,
Like
that's what I meant. It was like one thing after another. I'm like, when is this guy gonna get a bit of a breather?
I do get breathers. But I think, talking about like these trials is
Yeah.
there's so much more teaching in these moments, I think, than bliss and comfort. And there's always times of like when nothing's going on, like I'm just like, oh, I'm just in this is nice. And then this little voice will be like, am I sure I'm not bypassing something? I'll look in, I'm like, am I trying to avoid something because life is been one of those periods where like nothing is really coming up,
Mm-hmm.
and then sure enough, some
Boom.
some happens. Yeah, yeah. This year has been an incredible teaching. Like the first 3 months of this year, where it was like non-stop, and this hadn't been my experience for years. Of like usually if something came up, it would it might last for a day, and that would kind of be it. And I was like, okay, well, this is nice.
Mm-hmm.
But then some core wounding things got triggered, like one after another. Like I would work through it over a period of days, and then have a couple of days of rest and be like, because when we're with these things, they lead to this connection that we really want. This opening and uh, just a deeper connection and a deeper peace, a deeper sense of peace, I think. And the first 3 months of this year where it was just one thing after another. And I was like, what is going on? I had to question. I was like, am I depressed? Is this depression? And I just, it, it was just, yeah, meeting some things. And I even had this one day of that felt just like the spiritual emergency. And I was really surprised about that.
Oh,
Because if
wow.
I was surprised at this spiritual emergency that happened in 2013
Yeah,
after doing
yeah.
this work, blah, 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 I was really surprised about the spiritual emergency that happened this year. And it was my orientation to it was completely different. I was like, let's go. This is what's up. Let's do it. Let's go and just let all the negative thoughts or difficult feelings, feeling that existential hopelessness, and that was an amazing teaching because that I feel like we meet things and then years later we can meet uh, the same things we thought we'd worked through, but we're more available to them. We can meet them on a more deeper level within ourselves. We can meet them more completely. And so when something comes back that you might feel like, I've already worked through that. What's going on? I I think that's normal that we're ready to just meet them on a be more present with them. And I look at those experiences as gifts. I'm like, God, even though it feels like shit, God is right here. I'm working through something, and that my orientation is not of dread around it or uh, they're painful experiences. So there's a certain amount of just difficulty and maybe even suffering around it on some level. But when you know that the divine is like working you in that moment, there's something I need to see here. There's a gift for me here in this experience. We aim straight for it. I just it's not a question of like just getting through the experience or something. We're like, yes, there's this existential, this core yes that comes up. And like, I'll meet this, I'll meet this experience.
Yeah, I just love how life has a
It's
way to,
beautiful.
yeah, it's the I call it the um I'm done or I arrived syndrome, you know. That I think there's a
Oh, and life will
right?
come up and they'll be like, "Oh, you're done, huh?" Our life is our
Yeah,
greatest teacher, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. To be honest, it was one of the greatest teachings. It was actually such a short encounter at some point in this journey with a teacher online. I mean, it was literally
Mhm.
5 minute encounter, and I just said something, you know, I don't remember exactly how I put it, but what I was really saying was like, hey, I've had all this awakening, and stuff like that, but like I'm still suffering. There's still so much stuff coming up. When is this going to end, basically? Where's the where's the end point, right?
Yeah.
And you read the book, so and she said to me, well, if you're asking this question, then there's still a way to go. And I couldn't understand, obviously, at that point, other than I know that she spoke truth because I could just feel it.
Mhm.
I also felt so utterly ashamed and like, just
Oh,
totally like full on embarrassment, redness of like my arrogance on full freaking
but we
display.
all, that's everybody. That's all of
I
us.
mean, talk about the teaching right there. You know what I mean? Like direct
Right.
experience of my shadow coming out for everyone to see, basically, which is why which is why I appreciate her even more because she was so gracious in that. She wasn't coming from a place of girl, like, judging me or making me feel bad for that. It's almost like she mirrored this in me without even trying to. But it came almost from a place I've been there myself. I see you, like as in like I really see you. I see where you're at. I've been there myself, not from I'm so beyond you. Let me tell you, there's still there's still more to go. And even though I didn't quite at that point, that embarrassment and that shame was such a important experience, in and of itself, albeit
Yes.
incredibly uncomfortable. Um, but and I got to understand what she was pointing to a few months later, where it was this just basically seeing that I was still basically looking for some kind of endpoint, for some kind of point in time where I will no longer have to experience any kind of discomfort or a
Mhm.
particular kind of discomfort. And so, even though there was full on embracing of things at that point, there was this like lingering sense of dissatisfaction and wanting
Mhm.
something else, something different, and when this went, it was just like, yeah, you just the whole assuming that I'm ever done with anything, that stuff stuff is not gonna ever come up or anything like that, that was just like done and dusted.
Oh, this enlightenment is the end of suffering. It's the end of having those things come up. That's what I thought it was, oh, the greatest like escape possible.
Yeah, yeah,
But it's really meeting those things. I mean, that's the teacher. I mean, God,
yeah.
if we didn't have that stuff come up, where would we be?
I
You
don't
know?
know. To me, that's when it comes to awakening, that's where the rubber meets the road, as they say. You know what I mean? It's in those dark places. It's precisely in the things that we want to avoid, that we don't want to look at, and that are
Yeah.
uncomfortable. Which is why, sometimes, it may feel like, are we actually looking for awakening, or are we just looking to feel better? Or just
Yeah.
feel nice, which is, and I say this with no judgment. There's nothing wrong with just wanting to feel good, or,
Hmm.
wanting things to be just okay, or to be peaceful, right? But, if when we don't know that the awakening journey does not involve only those kinds of experiences, right? Or that the sort of what I call the peace with capital P does not mean absence of turmoil, or does not mean absence of, challenging experiences, then it really comes like a surprise to people, when shit hits the fan, especially after the first awakening, and you're like, what's going on? Which is one of the
Yeah.
reasons why I appreciate your book so much.
But it's not the freedom from those things, it's the freedom to be with those things, and it's the freedom to be free in every experience.
Yeah, yeah. Brilliant. Jim, is there anything else you'd like to say? Because I just thought that this was such a wonderful conclusion, that your last
Okay.
line. But if you have anything else that you'd like to share, then please go ahead and do so. And also, what is it that you do? Do you actually work one-on-one with people at all?
I
If
haven't been
so, no,
working with
okay.
anybody. I do have a website and people can contact me through there's an email on the website. And yeah, I have a YouTube channel. And I don't know what I'm doing with it. Just talking about like certain things that I see that I feel are interesting.
Thank you so much, Jim, for your time. Thank you for sharing your story. And as I said, everyone, I'm gonna leave all the links and the title of the book in case you already forgot what it was below as well. So you can go ahead and check out his book. Thanks,
Well,
Jim.
yeah, thank you for the opportunity, Maggie. It was great conversation. It's great to talk with you too.
Thank you.